Kia ora.
I call Nuk Karaka. I call Nuk Karaka.
Kia ora. E te kaiwhakahaere. It's my pleasure to take a contribution or make a contribution to the Building Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Bill. Sir, it's really interesting when we hear a lot of the talk from people that don't come from Christchurch but are actually speaking, and I think in some ways what I'm hearing, and it's something, sir, that we've seen a lot of in Christchurch ever since 2010. And what I mean here, sir, is that it's called cherry picking. And it's actually about looking at taking just sort of different sort of points or facts, and then what we're doing, sir, what they're doing is then sort of trying to contribute to changing this legislation. Sir, the situation is, if we go back to the Christchurch earthquakes and remember that the first one was back in the 4th of September 2010, and we've had, and these are the major ones, major events. The main event, as we know, was February 22nd, 2011. And then the next one, June the 13th, 2011. And then December 23, 2011. And then, of course, sir, this year was another major one, which we call the Valentine's Day earthquake or event. What I'm talking about here is that looking at the pathway of this bill, right from Select Committee, there were so many specialists, engineers, victims that came to submit. And so when we look at this legislation, sir, there was a lot of work that was done by the Select Committee. And when I hear sort of different speakers talking about sort of trying to change the balance, because what this does, sir, I mean, the main changes is sort of a varying timetable, which is used for strengthening sort of relative to earthquake risk. So then we're looking at the high, the medium, or the low. And then, sir, there was the prioritisation of public buildings, whether they're schools, emergency services and all of that. And that was sort of well thought out, and this was part of the balance. And then there were those that were sort of reducing the number of buildings that were covered. And Chris Farfoy actually went through the list of those that were exempt. And sir, if you were at the Select Committee, you would have heard actually why and the reasons why these were exempt. Actually, when you talk about a tunnel, you got to understand is that the epicentre was in the Port of Lyttelton for the February 2011 earthquake, and the tunnel now was actually probably one of the safest places to actually be in, because 2 or 3 days later, the tunnel reopened again. So just looking at sort of those sort of reasons for exemption. The other one, the situation is with these exempted buildings, and so let me come to where I'm based in the Port Hills. So when we look at the Port Hills, sir, we've got Horswell to the western side of it, which was hit in the Darfield earthquake, which was the 2010. And then from there, if we keep moving east again, well then what we're seeing, sir, we get to Summerfield, Lower Cashmere, and then we continue through heading east to where there's still 20% of the buildings over there that are actually, they're still looking for resolutions. And so what with those buildings actually were actually damaged or destroyed or will come under this legislation because of the fact that they were in the February 2011, and then sort of post events after that. What I'm saying here is that we've got to manage the actual safety factor and then balance it with the actual costs. And so what is being said over here, even with around the SOPs, is that it actually is not conducive with the information, Mr. Chair.
Nukarako.
It's not conducive, sir, with the information that we received as the select committee. And this is the reason, what you're seeing is there is a reflection here in this legislation, why we actually have done what we've done. And the situation, sir, is that we've got to manage the costs of strengthening. We've got to manage the costs. And then the other part of it is actually when we bring into the fact around historical buildings or heritage buildings, well then, sir, that is another sort of difficult part. But right throughout this whole thing, the thing that we didn't have at the beginning was actually an information database around these sort of heritage buildings, these historical buildings. And it's really interesting when you actually talk about the fact is that a lot of those buildings that actually are not used as much, and when you're talking about race courses, you're talking about, buildings that like farm buildings and all of that. I think the situation there is that take race courses, if they're only used five times a year, as someone has actually quoted that use time, well then also what they found with those buildings, sir, is the fact that the maintenance hadn't been, the upkeep of the maintenance hadn't happened. So you find that a lot of those buildings, sir, actually probably a bit more, dangerous than what we actually think. But the final part of this, sir, I come back to the cherry picking, is the fact that, and we talk about Auckland, we talk about Wellington. And when you look at Wellington, Christchurch was never actually in that really high seismic risk area. I mean, Wellington was the one. So, to actually say that, Auckland's not going to get hit, that place is not going to get hit, I think, you've got to actually come back to the fact, is that to listen to the experts, listen to the scientists, and they'll tell you exactly, bring you back to this bill, sir. So this bill, a lot of work's been done, sir, a lot of work's been done, and this bill here, sir, should suffice and go through. It's common sense. Kia ora.
Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr.